tapping that glass because I think I'm between you guys and drinks of some sort. So we're going to get going with our report out. We were asked to report out from the 3 different groups. We had a lively conversation for the first group, which was on, getting to underrepresented communities and populations and how do we help with helping with the disparities there. So this is reaching those communities almost all the way to like just 2 or 3 minutes before. We had some people helping us with the things that we were thinking through. I'll go through sort of the big themes. We didn't come up with a perfectly written RFP. We thought we would at least go through the big themes, and then the group's going to talk about how to create the RFP. So some themes that the group had, and by the way, I'm only describing it for a very awesome group. So if anybody in the group doesn't think I've captured everything, please raise your hand. We just typed this up about 4 minutes ago. So one of the first themes was sort of, even though we talk about, and we were really, a lot of people were struck by the concept of vascular deserts, they're saying, is there a data-driven way to define the components of those areas? A little bit like Matt was saying, some of those people or those areas may not have Epic or may not have other data sources. So how do you identify those places and people identifying their access to care, their relative risk for the disease burden and or outcomes, their economic risk or the economic risk if you didn't treat them. Additionally, while we were thinking about that, people were also saying, how do you engage the community to get to understand what works with trust? How do you define that risk, whether it's cardiovascular, limb, et cetera, across different groups, those that are asymptomatic, those that may be deteriorating. One of the other concepts there, or those that have CLTI, one of the other concepts there was that some of those models may also identify people that you traditionally don't think of as having a problem, and their risk is out of proportion to what you usually think about, and sometimes identifying that, or other systems that do that. So the other piece of this RFP was that some work like that might become something that's sustainable beyond this RFP. If you're building, I'll call it a concrete open source map of where opportunities exist to help people do better health, that might become something that's used for a lot of grants. So that was a component of what was thought there for that. How about interventions that improve how people from places where they're not always either getting access to care or underrepresented? So what are the behavioral interventions that have worked? Are there RFPs around that? I didn't advance that. Oh, there, thanks. Trusted sources, messengers, community health workers, building trust with technology. What are ways you might do that? Another theme that was in our conversations, how do you get to sustainability beyond one RFP? How do you do or build tools or have data that's helping you to engage people in trusted or unusual ways so that they continue to engage with you? What are non-traditional data sources? We heard a lot about what those exist and how you do it. And what would be ways that you might offload the work of primary care? Those are the themes, but the conclusion, or at least action item, was could you create an RFP that was designed to better understand how you might first define where those underrepresented and high-risk populations might be? We all have seen maps from different parts, but those maps do a lot of aggregation. They're not very close. They don't use some of the other data sources. They don't use some of the other things we've talked about. And in addition to just maps, there might be features. And then what interventions, another part of that RFP could be, if you already have areas, what interventions are you using to engage these underrepresented groups that are both sustainable and use existing or new data sources? I'll stop there and see if there's anybody in my group who, I'm sure there are parts of our rich conversation that I did not capture, but with the help of a fantastic team of medical students and others, we were able to get this together. It feels like the silence is deafening, which means it must be absolutely right. All right, well, thanks. I'm going to hand it over. I think, who goes next? Matt, do you go next, or?
That might be me. So I'll just jump in. So our group was trying to think about ways to develop and test ideas about better engaging, and we put the word vascular in there in between patients and caregivers in digital health. And the first question that came up in the group once everyone started talking about how challenging it is was sort of what's the end point, what's the outcome that we think is worth measuring here? And we centered, a lot of that discussion ended up coming up around education and awareness, and also possibly better satisfaction with physician visits, compliance with medications, or even seeking a physician visit. And some of the ideas that came up around there were to potentially develop specific chatbots that would be targeted for, say, aneurysm or PAD when a patient is getting a first consultation, that would help a patient get up to speed, to ask the right questions, know when they need to see somebody, know what's trouble or what's not trouble, and be able to test if that has any retention. I think the most exciting thing that came out was the idea to try to leverage screening opportunities as a way to get patients engaged in some form of digital health tool, and to leverage the existing investment that the foundation has made in the Champions program as an opportunity as that rolls out to other places, because there's an engaged audience already. And then with that as a background, to potentially create some digital tool or app that would track the engagement or enhance their understanding of disease or retention of disease, or seeking out a physician visit after they've screened positive for either diabetes, hypertension, or PAD, and then develop some sort of targeted questionnaire for phone follow-up, where one could take a look at what those outcomes were, what they retained, whether they got a visit, whether that, you know, their compliance with their medication. So something around the idea of test and retesting, the offer of some sort of digital engagement in the setting of the screening opportunity from a Champions program was a sort of a theme that sort of emerged from our group. And we talked about just a simple pilot study to test and retest. We even talked about maybe a block randomization scheme to see if whatever the tool that someone wanted to develop and test had an impact on any of these measurable outcomes, most of which are subjective and patient response to a follow-up questionnaire. One question that came up is, when patients participate in the screening programs, what are they consenting to? Are they consenting to being followed up with telephone calls and being a research participant? Or is it one time, and they can opt obviously in or out? We were wondering about what percentage of patients opt in to continue to be followed. In general, what's the experience so far? And also what the positivity rate is for the screenings for this target population. But those are some of the ideas that came up. If I've forgotten anything from our group. There's a lot of discussion about MyChart also, and developing better ways to leverage, people already have access to MyChart. I think there's a lot of opportunities there, a lot of ideas that came up, but you know, I think that's another tool rather than a screening. But you know, patients who are already in a system that has MyChart, can you develop and test a tool to see if it has retention or draws patients in with vascular disease and retains them in some way? Any other thoughts from our group that I may have missed? Steve brought up, you know, with the Facebook group, and how much is offered to patients there and how much is actually available. There's a ton of stuff that's available. The question really is, what's the trick to draw people in to access the information? How do we test if it has impact?
I like it. I think there's a lot of interesting pieces to what you guys talked about. You know, one thing that fits with a little bit of the first part that we talked about is that the people are still looking for trusted places. And as much as Vascular Cures could be a trusted place, that you become a place where people could engage. That may be one other thought. And the second, just again with the first part that we were thinking about with what you've described here, there may be things where information can be shared so people can then get information and provide their preferences. And then in other places we've done studies where we learn patients' preferences and then give them the choice to say, would you like to be contacted in the future for studies or therapies? And then what you start to learn is the things that get people interested in engaging. It's really tough.
No, but I think it's a great point. Even, you know, translation services, which have been so challenging in some ways and actually expensive. You know, some services charge by the word. to translate research forms and questionnaires now should be democratized. And so I would think that it should be a lot easier to do that at the appropriate level.
Recommendations you give to one of us with a certain level of education,
Yeah.
people who might be in these rural communities.
I think it's,
That's how you increase trust, right? I mean,
yeah, it'd be good.
they actually understand you.
It'd be good to test. I think AI is really good at making it at a certain grade reading level and certainly helping you with, I'll say, consent forms, things like that. They're probably good. Language translation. I'm not sure how much it changes when we have a group of patients that say, this is what I respond to and trust. That'd be an interesting thing to test some version versus when we get patient stakeholders together and do research together and say, tell us what matters. You know, it'd be interesting. See if it's as good. Because I don't know that answer.
There was a real dichotomy this morning between, it seemed like we heard from our patient family representative that patients trust their primary care doctor. We
Yeah.
heard from everybody else that primary care doctors can't bite this off. So there's a real gap.
That's what I was thinking, because they're, you know, chatbots, if people know they're chatbots, they're very questioning them. And then obviously the language might be variable and useful. It'd be great to see if it helps.
There's some demonstrations where people were connecting to some virtual person who became their friend, especially people who live by themselves, older people, and they feel like they have a friend, although it's a virtual friend. They talk to this person. Some people prefer the voice of a woman or a man or younger, older, whatever, you know.
Need a vascular Siri.
Like an AI navigator.
I'm just picturing or hearing Mike Conti's voice over this, and it doesn't quite get to where I'm used to or what I need. All right, should we go to the next one?
Yeah,
I think you got they got it.
our group was machine learning data set integrity, although our conversations kind of had a huge amount of parallels with the other two groups. There's a lot of discussion on just establishing a core infrastructure and issues around trying to collaborate across multiple institutions and how cumbersome it can be to get data use agreements and share algorithms or compare algorithms, get IRB approval. And there was discussion about the champions as kind of a jumping off point to say if you had a use case on a small scale in one place, it would be very advantageous competitively to go in and say, I've got this consortium of places we've demonstrated here, we're going to scale it up. There was also a lot of discussion about the need for qualitative data within that to understand qualitative data actually from the places doing the machine learning to really kind of sketch out what the barriers are that this would overcome. But what an advantage it would be. I think Dr. Ross mentioned there's an RFA out right now to build infrastructure for machine learning projects. And if you were intentional through vascular cures, you could go in with, you know, a very feasibility supporting kind of infrastructure to move ahead and break down some of these territorial regulatory barriers. And that could be potentially housed through vascular cures. There was also a lot of discussion about how can we target under-resourced or underserved populations for intervention, and with the notion that machine learning is going on right now in deeply resourced places where, you know, in some ways if you are at a place that's doing machine learning and you're in the vascular quality initiative, we would almost want to go look for these populations where those things are not right now. And how could we establish linkages between population level data, neighborhood data, claims data, GIS data, with EMR data to kind of, you know, connect. There's a lot of folks doing machine learning with discrete data elements. Could we connect that with people doing the same kind of machine learning with, say, imaging data to kind of, you know, synergize these? And back to that infrastructure, if you had an omnibus kind of consortium entry document for your legal folks, boy, wouldn't it be powerful to say we're going to have permission to mine our EMR data and also collect cross-sectional imaging data and non-invasive imaging data on these patients and start linking some of these projects that are so interesting that we've heard about. And our action items would be to just, the RFA to, get a group of people with this expertise, demonstrate its use with something like Champions, where you're penetrating a underserved community and extracting additional data elements, and then say the grant would be, we're going to scale this up across all these sites. The other thing I have to add is that Dr. Mintz was not in our group, but there was also a discussion about if we asked her to critique the AHA amputation heat map, that the proposal would sort of write itself out of what came out of her mouth. What did I miss? Other comments from my group? It was a great discussion. I wrote like 6 pages of notes. Am I overlooking anything? Yes. And you're talking about, when you say different people, you're talking about investigators in machine learning, talking about these infrastructure and linkage barriers we need to break down.
There's clearly a lot of overlap between a couple of these that you talked about, so I think that's really maybe good for vascular cures in the RFP process, because that helps us think through what some simple overlaps are. Did you guys in your group think about vascular cures as the trusted place where the algorithms would get tested and not have a financial risk, right? Because what right now is happening in our place, every place I suspect, is something might work in that sandbox, but does it work in that sandbox? And then if you had one big master sandbox where everybody came to test their tools, so that maybe that's what you guys were saying, and I wasn't understanding.
No, absolutely. Breaking down the territoriality and maybe some of the financial competition.
As a not-for-profit, it has the opportunity to say, here's a resource for everyone to come test their algorithms, and then employ RFPs to say, here's the populations where it's working, it's not working, here's the biases we're talking about, et cetera.
Yeah, and there was, I think the GitHub example got brought up. Could they even own the algorithms, or?
So that's the other, in our group we sort of said if that happened, then there might be a sustainability feature to access or other features which happen. So again, from a big broad scope, if you can do that, that's valuable, because everybody's looking for the training data sets and the sustainability data sets.
And we've got this PCORnet bullet point there, and that's just to say something where you define the data elements and standardize what they're called, but it's vascular specific. And using that as sort of just an example that we could kind of structure in a similar fashion.
Yeah, and the RFP could ask to go into PCORnet and do that now, right? Because that's happening for other things, so that's another opportunity.
Should I make some final thoughts here? Yes. So, on behalf of our board, I just want to say what a great day today was. Once again, like every other time we've done this, I feel pretty confident in saying that this conversation doesn't happen anywhere else, to this richness and to this level of heterogeneity and complexity. Had a great professor who once said that a great university is a place where you have the best conversations about the most interesting questions with the best conversation partners. Today was a great university for vascular AI, and I think lots of ideas for our board to take back and think about how to sort of create an RFP to go out. I think in general what we have always wanted to do is to see people respond with projects that are collaborative, that are feasible, that are doable, and that will help them leverage something to get to a next step that will really be catalytic to push the field in some direction. And I hope everybody also, felt that they had a chance to participate, but it's still ongoing, so please send us more thoughts, ideas after this. We like to stay engaged with everyone throughout, and we'll probably be able to come up with something within about a month or so. I don't know what you're thinking, Isabel?
Yeah, I mean, well, we gathered this information in about, I would say, 3 months, really. We ended up getting some calls for proposals to come out. This year, just to be clear, we have room for 2. They're not huge. They're $75K each, but again, they're, the foundational investigatory awards, so you can sort of pilot the ideas and get it to a point where you can apply for those NIH awards or do a startup or something like that. So I think 3 months is realistic. We tried a month last time, that did not work. So, and then we do try to award it pretty quickly thereafter. You know, we do our call, and you know, it's another 3 months. We get our proposals, and we decide quickly because that's what we care about, is really making sure that we move in an innovative way through this process, and you know, are different sort of than the slower. It's one of the great things about being a small nonprofit, right? You can do that. So. You will hear from us soon. We have videotaped all the talks. We put them out publicly for review. We want what people are talking about here and the gold that has been presented to be seen. And we consider this very much a community that we want to have a back and forth with. So we'll be in continual contact with you, and hopefully you will be in contact with us too. Thank you everybody very much. I hope that we see you tonight to celebrate. If we are not seeing you tonight, we hope you have a beautiful evening. And with that, I don't really want us to be that organization that goes way over time. So enjoy the outside.
Sure.